Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday. Whoa, hello. Sorry to those of you watching. You just got a minor earthquake here as my camera is not holding. The stand has become a little bit worn. Probably going to need a new one. And therefore, it's sliding. Hang on. Oh, guys. Get your Dramamine. There we go. All right, that's better. Good morning, Susie. Welcome aboard. Good morning to all of you, and welcome to Pondering. Sorry about that momentary glitch. Yes, we've recovered. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, it was challenging. It was difficult. It was harrowing for a moment, but we've got it back. We're good to go. And welcome to Pondering, the show where we ponder all things and we think about them. We talk about them. There are no holds barred. We do it Monday to Friday, 7:30 to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Facebook Live on the Pondering Radio page of Facebook. That's facebook.com/Pondering Radio. You can join in every weekday if you want to be part of the live show. You can comment, as Susie just did, in the live stream, or you can just watch. If you do want to participate at other times, if you're listening to us on a podcast on demand, well, hey, we want you to be part of the family, too, and have a say. So you can go to the Pondering Radio page and post there. You can also email ponderingradio@gmail.com, ponderingradio@gmail.com, or you can call us at 860-500-7163, 860-500-7163. Leave a message 24/7, 365. We will listen to it, and if appropriate, we might even play it on the air. Of course, that's if you want us to. Hey, guys, it's great. It's been a crazy week because with a day off, Monday, it always throws you for a loop. But it is Thursday. We are rounded the corner and are heading for home. And it's all good. Brenda, good morning to you. Welcome aboard. I'll wave at you. Great to have you as always, my dear. So there's a lot happening in the news, and I thought I'd start a little bit with is it George Floyd, the gentleman who was killed, the police officer kneeling on his neck, and the video, of course, has been viral. It's been on the news, it's been on Facebook, it's been everywhere. And I want to talk about that, and this is risky. You know, this is where you walk into the minefield as the host of Pondering or any other show, because there is a very specific narrative that has a very specific intent that you're supposed to stick to if you're a broadcaster or commentator or whatever. And as I've always said, this show exists that we would think things through. We wouldn't just swallow the headlines, the sound bites, the quick little video clips, but we would consider, think, and talk from a biblical Christian perspective, of course, and then, let our faith and our reason, the minds that God gave us, lead us to conclusions and actions, as opposed to just going with the flow, running with the other lemmings off the edge of the cliff into oblivion. And so I feel a need to address it because I see, as Yogi Berra was famous for saying, I see deja vu all over again with this case. Now, let's start with what we know. What we know was that a man died because a police officer was, after he had been cuffed and restrained, sitting on his neck with his knee on his neck. The man's begging to have relief because he can't breathe. He ends up passing out and dying, apparently before even the EMTs arrived. Certainly they say they never got a pulse. And that officer, therefore, and let me just be clear about this, should be tried. He's already been fired, along with the other officers that didn't intervene. I think that's the right action. I think a trial is appropriate. Excessive use of force is just that, excessive, and shouldn't be allowed. I have had family members, friends, who were in law enforcement who were brought up on those charges before, and there needs to be a hearing and a trial and so forth. And, hey, I have no problem with any of that. That's appropriate. It shouldn't have happened, shouldn't have been done. But, you knew there was a but. You know there was a however. And here's the however. I watched ABC News again. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. It's so painful. David Muir, who apparently is the most trusted man in the universe now, most watched show on television. Everybody kind of follows his lead, whatever he says. And they showed, first night, they showed the clip of the officer with his knee on the guy's neck. The poor man's crying for help. And then they tell that he died, and so on and so forth. Second night, they got recently obtained exclusive film from the beginning of the arrest. And they showed that. So they show a gentleman being taken away from his vehicle, or a vehicle, if it was his, in handcuffs. He's obviously drunk. He's talking. You can't hear what he said. They don't give you the audio. But he's not fighting. He's not resisting. They walk him away from the vehicle, out of the light of the camera, onto the sidewalk. So he's away from that spot. So they had that to show you that it was a peaceful arrest. He wasn't resisting. And then they show you him lying in the street with the officer's knee on his neck, and he's gasping for breath. I want to know where the video is of what happened in between. I have a hard time believing that whoever shot the first video and whoever shot the last video just somehow lost everything in the middle, or that there was no one else taking video on their phone, or that the body cams from the police officers don't show something in between. And the reason I want to know that is not to justify what happened, because I've already said you can't. That's an excessive. The guy's in handcuffs. He's on the ground. You don't need to slam your knee into his neck until he dies. That's wrong. It's evil. You shouldn't do it. But the narrative is, and you guys have to realize this, we need to think this through, ponder it. The narrative is this gentleman was killed because he's black. They even referred to him last night on ABC News as the Gentle Giant. His family said he was the Gentle Giant. Some of you may remember that's the same phrase they used for the young man shot in St. Louis, 4 years ago, maybe 5, after he robbed a convenience store and then attacked an officer and then was shot by the officer. And the way it was projected in the news initially was unarmed young man shot by policemen. And, of course, that led to riots and burnings and violence. And he was called the Gentle Giant. Now we have a new Gentle Giant, quote unquote. They showed video of him playing football in high school with his, pictures with his family. He's a friendly, wonderful, nice man, just a big guy. But because here's the narrative. He's black, so the police killed him. Basically, that's the simplified version of what the media is projecting. And as much as I agree the officers should be fired, and I agree that there should be penalties of some sort, a trial for excessive use of force, I don't accept the narrative that these policemen, 4 policemen altogether, were driving along in their cars and they saw a big black guy and said, let's kill him, he's black. I don't believe that he just was sweetly, minding his own business. They led him to the sidewalk in handcuffs and then said, you know what, let's throw him back in the street next to his car, slam him to the ground, put our knee on his neck until he chokes to death. Let's do that. All right, let's go. Don't believe it. I don't believe that when a police officer puts on a uniform or a badge, he or she becomes racist, regardless of their own race or national background or experience, which is another media projected image and concept. So I suspect, because he was clearly drunk, because they'd been called to the scene to investigate someone forging a check, he was probably committing a crime, that when they arrested him, he was mouthing off, which is why they don't play the audio, just the video of him being led away from the car. And he probably started to fight them. The officer said that's what happened, by the way. That's kind of tucked in there somewhere in the story, that he resisted arrest. But apparently, I would suspect the reason we haven't seen the video of what happened in between is because he did. He fought them. He probably kicked, bit, and struggled, and headbutted, whatever else he could do in handcuffs. Ran back out towards the street. They tackled him. And therein lies the scene where the policeman, probably out of anger, maybe a little fear, slammed him to the ground, or they didn't actually show him slammed to the ground, put his knee on his neck and sat there until the man expired, which is, again, wrong, not excusable, not saying it's an excuse. But here's the issue, and this is why we need to ponder these things. If we believe the officers just drove down the street, saw a black man, the Gentle Giant, and decided to kill him just because he's black, then we've got a problem. And that's why last night And yesterday, there were riots, burnings, and violence in the streets of Minneapolis. And that's exactly what the media wants and gets each time. Happened in St. Louis. It's happened in other cities. It happened in Atlanta. It will continue to happen as long as people don't ponder or think through what they're being given. They don't ask questions like, where's the rest of the video? They don't consider the officers involved and trying to know them. By the way, there are 4 officers that were there and that were fired. Only 2 are visible on the video I saw. Why aren't the other 2 shown? The 2 that are visible are white. I wonder. I don't know. And perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe that's not even an issue. But I wonder whether or not the other 2 are not white, which is why they're not shown. Because you see, that wouldn't fit the narrative, would it? The narrative is gentle giants walking down the street. Policemen see him, decide to kill him, so they kill him. And now we should burn down buildings, throw bricks at people, riot, and try to kill policemen. That is the narrative. That is the motive. That is the desire, because that sells papers and that sells advertising on television. That gets viewers, right? That narrative. But I just want us to be very careful not to swallow it without the facts. What we know, a policeman with 3 others not intervening, therefore they're guilty too by default, used excessive force after a man was already restrained and the man died. They were fired. They should have been, and he'll be prosecuted. He should be. That's what we know. What we don't know is, are those officers all racist? Did they have a history of racism? What we don't know is, did the man resist, fight them, kick them, bite them, whatever he could do, headbutt them, and end up therefore being wrestled back into the street and onto the ground? We don't know whether the officers were all white, even though they're projected as such. And we should know those things before we go off and start burning buildings, throwing bricks at policemen, and continuing to create more racial divide and distress in our world that has enough problems as it is. So I'm just throwing that out there as an example of pondering, thinking things through, because I think it's a good teachable moment for me and all of us. If we swallow what the media's given us, we would believe that all police officers are racist, and they saw this poor gentle giant walking down the street and decided to kill him. I don't think that's what happened. I think that this guy was committing a crime, was arrested, he was drunk, he was mouthing off, probably started to fight them, was dragged back down into the street, onto the ground, and that's where officer, lost control and, committed a crime. And the man is dead, and the officer should be punished for that. However, we shouldn't be rioting for racial reasons over white supremacist police, racism, etc., and all this other nonsense, because I don't think there's evidence of that. Now, maybe it'll come out, and I'll say so. I'll stand corrected or sit corrected if that happens. I just want us to ponder, not just, oh yeah, look at that. Those cops are all racist, and they just want to kill people. That's what leads to the disaster that's happening right now in Minneapolis. Here we are in a time of economic turmoil, and we're burning down businesses and buildings because we're so mad at the racist cops. I can understand anger over excessive use of force, but that's not what this is about. That's not what the media is projecting, and that's not what leads to, the mess we have in Minneapolis, nor in St. Louis before, or any other city. So, just an example of pondering that might help us and avoid more problems. 2 wrongs don't make a right, as they always say. Susie says, the only reason you're questioning any of this is because you're a racist. Yes, I know. And that's the problem, right? That's why most people, talk show hosts, whatever, won't dive into it. They just, spew the narrative. Yes, this is a tragedy. This is horrible. We've got to do something about racism in our country. They'll say stuff like that. And that's as far as they dare go, because they'll be labeled as such. Listen, I don't care what color he was. I don't care what background he had. I don't care how tall, short, thin, fat, whatever any of the officers were or the man that was killed. The facts are there was excessive use of force. There needs to be a penalty for that. There will be. But we shouldn't go further and try to project that this was a hate crime, because there's no evidence to suggest it was. Other than the fact that the white officer who had his knee on the neck of this man was white and that the victim was black. That's all we have. And I don't think that's enough to play the race card and start riots. I'm sorry. I just don't. So, there you have it. Pondering for what it's worth. Will I be labeled? Probably. But I already have been. I'm a middle-aged white guy. I've got to be a racist, right? That's the label. That's the presumption. That's the thought. And it's sad because it shouldn't be that way. So anyway, hope that's helpful. I hope you'll get a chance to look at it. There's also more news in the COVID-19 crisis. Some of you may have seen yesterday that Dr. Fauci said that it's not necessarily true that we're going to have a second wave, that the second wave can be avoided, that it's not a guarantee. It's not, because he can see. Yeah, Jennifer says, and you're homophobic. Yeah, I'm sure I am, because I'm a middle-aged white guy, and I'm a heterosexual, so I must be homophobic. Anyway, so yeah, Dr. Fauci says that there is no guarantee that we're going to have a second wave of COVID-19. Now that you say, well, oh, good. I'm glad that they discovered this. Well, please know they didn't discover anything. This has always been true, but his words in earlier press conferences, as well as other medical professionals and people that have been involved in this whole thing, people that have been part of the task force, have been taken out of context and promoted by the media to say, basically, the second wave is inevitable. And it's going to be worse than the first wave, and everybody's going to die. It's going to add, and not only are we going to have another wave of COVID, not only is it going to be more dangerous and a kind of morphed and evolved hybrid version of COVID that's really dangerous and deadly, but it's going to merge with pneumonia at the same time in a perfect storm to wipe out the entire population of the United States, basically. Okay, I'm exaggerating a bit their statement. They didn't say it would wipe out the entire population, but massive deaths would occur. All right. And I've said from day one, those of you that have listened and watched the program, I've said from day one, there's no evidence of that. None. No evidence of that at all. That's just part of the hype to create the ongoing narrative that sells ad space and newspapers and allows for more control from the progressive, politicians who want control in certain states. Oh, I don't know, like Connecticut, for example. So I think we just need to be aware of the fact that even Dr. Fauci himself is saying that's not necessarily true, that there's going to be a second wave. And it can be prevented, as we take things out the right way. Yeah, Dee says the plandemic. Yeah. And I know there's a real virus. I've seen the results of it. I've dealt with people who've lost loved ones because of it. And so I would never downplay that. However, what's also true is that the death numbers have been dramatically exaggerated. It was so funny. I was sitting on the couch and I was reading some stuff, and the news was about to come on. And I said to my son, "You watch. They're going to lead with a story that there are 100,000 COVID-19 deaths. You watch." Sure enough, on comes David Muir. Tonight, on the COVID-19 crisis, the death toll climbs to a disgusting and frightening 100,000 people. And it's just not true. It's just not true. There are not 100,000 people who just kind of go walking along. Someone sneezed on them, they got COVID-19, and they dropped dead. Not true. Many thousands, probably tens of thousands of those counted in that number were people that had other terminal conditions who died, who, yes, perhaps, and I'll come back to the perhaps, contracted COVID-19. And yet we're already, dying. They had other comorbid conditions, and COVID-19 came along and they got it, and they've been counted as a COVID-19 death, even though technically it probably wasn't the cause of death. In addition to that, there are people who have never been tested, but had some respiratory problems, other things, and they died. And because there were people in the same facility or area that had it, they've been assumed to be COVID-19, but never shown to be COVID-19. I know of a case myself where I think that was true of a gentleman I administered to as a chaplain. They don't tell you that necessarily, that those are also counted. Some of them. Yeah, probably COVID-19. Okay, COVID-19. Yep. Add another one, ding, to the list. So I don't believe there's anywhere near 100,000 deaths, first of all. Second of all, when you consider all the people who, have never shown symptoms and not been tested, and they shouldn't be tested, by the way. This idea that we should test every human being on the planet is ridiculous. And I've talked about that in the show before. It's ridiculous because, number one, it'll never happen. Not everybody's going to succumb to having the things jammed up their nose, as I have. But number two, even if we did, and we grabbed everybody and forced them to have the swab up their nose, we still would only know at that moment in time how many people had COVID-19. That's all we'd know. Snapshot. Boom. At this moment, X number of people have it. That's all we'd have. We wouldn't necessarily know who had it before unless we test for the antibodies. Even that's not a guarantee, but we'd have a few more numbers from that if we tested for antibodies. But the next second, and now I know 5 seconds later, you could be walking away, someone sneezes, boom, the person that didn't have it, that tested negative, is now positive. So it's a pointless exercise. But there are many, we believe, and everybody agrees with this, there are many thousands that have probably had it, don't even know they've had it because they never showed symptoms. I was with some patients yesterday who have it but don't show any symptoms. So, when you look at that and you compare it to the death numbers, even the ones they're saying, even if you accept the 100,000, which I absolutely don't, it's ridiculous. But if we accept 100,000 and we look at all those that have had it, that we know have had it, and then add to that the thousands that probably have had it that we don't know for sure, but, it's very likely based on, the evidence we have, we would say that the death rate to this thing is very low. And therefore, to destroy our economy, destroy our kids emotionally and educationally, to run around with masks on all day long and end up being social recluses is probably overreacting just a bit. There are precautions we can take. Yes, maybe there are times we should wear masks when we're up close and personal. Okay, I'll go with that. But this mass hysteria, shutting everything down, and then bizarre dichotomies where we allow certain things to be open and others not, where there's no science involved at all. It's just emotional. And like I said, I can have a colonoscopy and I can have, these various procedures without masks or anything else on for that matter. And yet you can't get your hair cut by someone in masks with a gown and gloves on. I mean, there's something wrong with this picture. So I think all that to say that they're still hyping, they're still projecting all this, but there's good news. And the good news is experts are saying there's no guarantee of a second wave. They are also having to admit that even though things are opening, there's not this dramatic increase in cases. So they've tried to project there's an increase, but it's not significant. Now, literally a handful of new cases in Connecticut after phase 1 of reopening. And even that is, I think, questionable, the numbers, because are we testing everyone? Do we know? I mean, do we know how many have or haven't had it, or how many had it before? They went to the hospital or went to a doctor and now are reported as new cases. Did they truly get it because they went to an outdoor restaurant and sat 10 feet away from somebody else? I don't think so. So the truth is there's some really good signs. There have been some reopenings. There's some encouraging things that we should be thankful for and continue to pray about in the midst of all of this. Susie says, has anyone died of pneumonia since it started? Yeah, I mean, that's true. There have been cases of pneumonia reported as COVID-19. We know that also is a fact. So yeah, we have to, and it is true. I was listening to a nurse the other night on a talk show, called in and said she was working in a COVID-19 ward, and she said, listen, I think we're overreacting. I think this is over the top. She said, I've seen many cases where people have very, few symptoms, if any symptoms. She said, I've been exposed to every disease in the last 35, 40 years I've been a nurse that you can imagine. Flesh-eating, bacteria, everything. And she said, I know how to handle it. I don't bring it home. My family's never been sick. She said, I think we should obviously take care of those that are at risk, but this idea that we need to shut everything down and hide in our homes for the next 20 years is ridiculous. And I agree. I definitely agree with that. Good morning to John. Great to have you with us. Susie says, the regular flu. Yeah. Again, more people die every year of the flu than COVID-19. We might argue that COVID-19 spreads more easily and has spread more rapidly, and that there are cases of COVID-19 that are much more extreme than the flu, because people do die sometimes very quickly with it. I've seen that, and I don't deny it. But again, is it as projected in the media? No. You don't walk out of your house without a mask and drop dead in your front yard. Um, there is not a need, in my humble opinion. And by the way, this has been stated also by experts. In fact, there's some pushback from some of the medical team in Washington and others against the idea that we have to wear masks everywhere. That they're actually saying, listen, unless you're going to be in close proximity, 3 or 4 feet away from people, you don't need the mask. If you are going to be in close proximity, they suggest it, and I think it's wise, and I would agree with that. Go, put the mask on. But you're walking down the street to the park, or you're going to the grocery store, but you're staying 6 feet away. Now, the stores won't allow you to do this, so, comply. Don't be a jerk. But in terms of medical science, if you're not going to be 6 feet or closer, and you're literally going to keep social distance, and you're going to stand in line and stand on the marked spots as you're in the grocery store, you don't need a mask. You're not stopping anyone from getting it, and you're not preventing yourself from getting it if you're 6, 8, 10 feet away from people the entire time you're out in public. But to avoid fear and panic, and if you're going to be closer, then yeah, wear the mask. I get that totally. But this idea that everybody's got to have a mask on every time they go indoors, and oh my God, in your car, you see people driving the car with the mask on, and the ones that crack me up are the ones with the mask that's down here somewhere. They got the mask on. Maybe it's over their mouth. The nose is sticking out there. That is about as helpful and useful as a screen door on a submarine, because your nose is the primary culprit in projecting any kind of virus or anything else for many, many feet. If you sneeze, it covers the room, right? So these people walking around with a mask down here, their noses, I'm like, why? I mean, is it a fashion statement? Because it's certainly not helping you or anyone else medically. But that's beside the point. I digress. When you got a nose this size, you need like a separate mask just for the nose, okay? And then you put one over that over the mouth. Yeah, I do wear two, but that's not because of my nose. But yeah, this schnozola baby, it needs maximum coverage. An extra, extra large mask. Jimmy Durante would be jealous. And if you know who Jimmy Durante is, you're old like me, so sorry. Hate to break it to you. As soon as he says, I saw a guy on a motorcycle with a mask. Well, I guess, if you're flying along like that, the COVID virus could go right through the mask into your mouth, so probably wouldn't help you. Oh, I don't know. Craziness. Anyway, got to wrap up. We're done. We'll be back tomorrow for Free for All Friday. Listen, be thinking about topics, verses, questions, comments you want to make. There are no topics, no guests tomorrow. I won't be launching into a tirade on a news story like I did today. So feel free to bring up whatever's on your heart and mind in the morning. Tell your friends, neighbors, and complete strangers about us. The more the merrier. And we'll be back in 23 hours here on the Pondering Show, 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. In the meantime, stay in the Word, keep praying, and do not check your brain at the door. Do not swallow the sound bites. Think it through and keep on pondering. God bless you.